Okay, welcome back, guys. Today we have on Craig Kirchner. He is the president at SPS Golf Retail Consulting. He's also the author at the Upscale Golf Shop in the PGA magazine, and he runs the site, The Successful Pro Shop, on blogspot.com. This interview, this conversation is about a career in golf on the merchandise side, on the retail side. Talk about how to get into it, just some of the details that Craig has become very familiar with, and just the level of expertise that he's acquired. Craig, welcome to the show.
Yes. Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Dave.
So before we get into the real hard-hitting questions, let's take it back. When did you pick up golf clubs? Were they Fisher Price golf clubs, or was it just something where everybody in your group was golfing? How did you get into golf?
I started playing golf when I was 14 years old, which was about 100 years ago. But that really isn't what I do for a living by any means. But yeah, I've been hanging around golf and trying to play golf for about 50 years.
Now, the cool thing, I touched on it in the intro, the cool thing about you is that you're not you're in the sports world, but you're slightly separated, and you're highly involved in the business side of it. So talk to us about your sales and apparel experience, and then we'll mesh how that goes in with golf.
Okay. I've been in the golf end of the apparel business since 1989. I started as a local territory rep for a large shirt company that was selling to the golf industry, and for about 5 or 6 years worked the Mid-Atlantic territory here in Maryland and Virginia, driving one of those big 24-foot vans full of samples around and writing orders for people and helping them run their shops. I did that for about 6 years. In 1994, the same company that I was working for promoted me to a vice president of sales. I had a peer group of vice presidents, so we each had kind of different responsibilities. My responsibility, for the most part, was the field. And what I mean by that is I didn't even report to an office, so to speak. I was always either in troubled territories with new reps, or territories where there were huge accounts like the Pinehursts and the Pebble Beach and the TPCs of the world. I did that for about 6 years, and so now we're 12 years of selling shirts and kind of getting tired of it. And I was going to actually get out of the golf business. And I had some golf pros that I explained that to, and they said to me, don't get out of the golf business. Just start charging people for all the help you've been giving them over the last dozen years, and we're sure you'll make out just fine. So I went home and built the business plan around that concept. And the first 3 people I took it to said yes, and then I was kind of off and running with a consulting business. And that goes back to about 2000, I guess, that all happened. In 2008, I had been doing that for quite a while and had run through a bunch of high-end accounts and had worked with management companies and resorts, et cetera, and decided that I was going to write a book called The Successful Pro Shop. So I started researching what I do to market this book once I have it in my hand. I love to write, so writing the book wasn't going to be a problem. I had an outline. I had a publisher lined up. And all the research that I did said that you need to create a blog, drive people to the blog, and sell them the book. So in 2008, in December, I put up a blog called The Successful Pro Shop. I put up 3 or 4 entries in the blog after I created it. I sent out an email announcement to about 400 guys that were in my email list, kind of who's who of golf that I'd gotten to know over the years, and said, if you guys think this has any merit, let me know. If you really think it has any merit, pass it along to your email list. And I now have like 22,000 contacts, and that blog, Successful Pro Shop blog, is being read pretty much all over the world. It's being read in about 80 countries, some of which I never even heard of. And it gets about 6,000 or 7,000 reads a month.
So let's
now I'm at a point where I wear a lot of different hats, is the point.
Yeah. Let's take a quick break. Like, for those of you who are paying attention, okay, you're not like just another guy, another sports consultant. You're somebody who has rehabilitated troubled shops. You've set up brand new shops. You've sold shirts. You've sold samples. You've traveled. You're an expert in what you're doing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair to say that I get called an awful lot for advice. Yeah.
So one of the things I want to do as we get along in this conversation, I do want to focus on some of the principles and some of the things that you've learned just going into different pro shops, dealing with different assistant golf pros and PGA directors at different courses and all those things. Just some of the what successful guys do, what some of the not successful guys do. But we'll get there. We'll get there in a little bit.
Yeah, I can put a context around that for you real fast.
Yeah, in all your time on the road before you started your own business, actually, I guess we can group that in too. What was your favorite part? I mean, obviously it's a draining ordeal to be a part of, but you got really good at it. What fascinated you? What captured your imagination?
About what aspect of what I've done are you talking about?
Retail, like just going to different pro shops, sharing with samples, rehabilitating shops. Like what was the one aspect of your career out on the road before you started to consult that fascinated you, that helped you get even more traction when you started your own consulting firm?
Well, I enjoyed sales, and one of the first things that dawned on me when I hit the road trying to sell golf shirts to golf pros in their shops was that most of them weren't retailers. They didn't get into the golf business to be retailers. They didn't get into the golf business to be merchandisers. They obviously got into the golf business to play golf, to talk golf, to help people with their golf games, etc. So that created a real niche for me because I came into the golf business from a retail background, and I knew retail. So right off, as a salesman, what I started doing was really consultative selling, which was to help a guy create a buy plan for his shop. I quick on realized that people were getting in my van to look at samples and to do a buy, and they had a budget, but they had no plan at all. And I would say to them, "What's your buy plan?" And they would look at me like I was from Mars. So quick on, rather than show them a whole bunch of samples and try to get an order, it occurred to me that what they really needed from me was help as to how to create a buy plan for their space. And that's what I started doing and became very successful as a salesman with that consultative selling approach because people appreciated that they needed the help. They appreciated that I knew what I was talking about. And when I'd get done with Retail 101 and 102, they would say to me, okay, so what space do you want? What do you want to put in it? And that's how I got it.
So, like,
then I did that again as vice president of sales for the same company. You know, my approach really hasn't changed.
Yeah. So let's do some comparing, contrasting. So what you just talked about how a lot of guys didn't know what a buy plan was. Let's talk about let's go a little bit deeper into that. What are some of the key things that you know and see in pro shops that are maybe not struggling but are underachieving at least?
Most pro shops that are underachieving for one of two reasons. They either do not have the proper service culture to sell goods, because it's human nature with all customers at retail everywhere that they buy from people they like. So if you have a service culture that caters to the customer, that's like, you know, rule one. Create a service culture, because frankly, it doesn't matter how beautiful your shop is, or what your product mix is, or what your price points are, or what your product selection is, or whatever. If the people that run that shop, if the people that talk to the customers aren't liked, you're really not going to do well. The other big problem in the pro shop industry right now is being over inventoried. And it's really hard to make money at retail if you're over inventoried, because you're always struggling to get back to a healthy inventory level and giving up margin to do that. And that, to me, or one of the things that I run around and preach, is that if you have the proper buy plan, you will be able to get straightened out with your inventory level and then maintain it at a healthy level that'll allow you to make money.
So that's awesome. Let's break down a proper buy plan, like just in general hypothetical terms. How do I, as a hypothetical pro shop guy, how do I set up a buy plan that will be sufficient for my club pro shop? Like, what are some of the things I need to evaluate?
Well, the first thing I always do when someone brings me on board to help them out with that is I draw an overview of the shop, and I include all the fixtures in the shop that are going to hold all the different categories of goods that we're going to try to sell. Once I have an overview of the shop with all the fixtures included, then I go back and I specify what is in each fixture and how many units does it hold. People stack shirts on the table, for example. Well, how many shirts? How many shirts does it take to make that table look really, spiffy? And how many shirts does it take to provide the right kind of selection to the customer that's going to shop that table? And once you do that for the entire shop, in any given category, and we'll talk about apparel because it's the easiest one and probably the most important one to talk about. Once you know how many units per fixture, then you can add up and say to yourself, okay, this shop can hold 1,200 units of apparel at any given time in total. Then you go back and you figure out what the retail on that would be, and that's easy to do against average retail sale. Let's say the average retail sale in your pro shop is $60 and you can hold 1,200 units, then your retail at any given point in time is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $72,000. I think I did that math right. Which would mean that if you bought strictly to the plan, you own 1,200 units, you sold them all for $60 the next day, you would be taking $72,000 to the bank the following day. Now, obviously, that doesn't happen. So then what you do is you take a sales report and you divide the $72,000 worth of inventory or worth of revenue that is represented on your floor into whatever your sales report tells you you're supposed to do for the year. And just for the sake of this conversation, let's say that it's $350,000. Well, that means that you're probably going to turn that inventory that you just took the time and did the homework to decide what that inventory should look like in terms of retail revenue. And you have to believe in that homework now. If you divide that number into the number that you're trying to make for the year, you realize that you have to turn that room, you have to turn those number of units that you prescribe per fixture 5 times in order to make your number, in order to make your sales for the year. Now you have 2 really important numbers. You know what you max out at in terms of total apparel units, and you know how many times you should turn that. Now when you get in a van to make a buy, you've done the homework, and you can say to the fellow that's trying to sell you, okay, we want to give you this table. This table holds 100 units. We want to turn that 5 times. So I'm going to rate you 500 units worth of pre-booked orders. And then the proper thing to say next would be, and once this stuff starts coming in, I want you to come back and help me train my staff how to sell your stuff.
Awesome.
That's how you. That's the nuts and bolts of how you create a buy plan.
That's, and the cool thing about it, I mean, if you're selling anything, not just at a pro shop, if you don't know those 2 numbers, you don't know those hard numbers, it's kind of hard to, to project and maintain profits.
Well, and I make the analogy all the time, David. If you owned a Cadillac dealership and you had 150 parking places and Cadillac called you up and wanted to ship you 200 cars for the season, you would have to tell them to keep 50 of them because you don't have a place to put them. And the other thing that I add to that analogy is, and you wouldn't let them ship you any Cadillacs if your staff didn't know how to talk about Cadillacs.
Yeah. Well, that's a perfect segue into the other side of the question, and some of the best shops that you've seen, that you've been associated with. What are some of the, besides a buy plan and having a good presence, what are some of the other characteristics and traits of a great pro shop?
Typically, it all starts at the top. If the guy running the operation, if the guy running the golf operation is the type of leader who understands that he needs to create a service culture, he's already on second base with no outs, okay? If that's not the case, he doesn't have much of a chance. So that, to me, and that has become, I think I made the point that I started out as a salesman, with this buy plan approach and this consultative selling. It's matured now over the years to number 1 is service culture. If we don't have a service culture, everything else that we do isn't really going to matter much. So we need to have trained, personable people working this operation and working in this shop, or, like I said, none of the rest of it is really that meaningful. So I provide that training, and I provide that product knowledge, and I provide help in hiring the right people if I'm asked to. And it's true of anybody that runs any golf operation, whether they're called director of retail or director of golf or head pro or whatever their title. They're only as good as the weakest link that they have in that staff.
Yeah, the question I always find myself asking, whether it's guys who are like yourself who know and do a lot about sales and marketing, or they're guys that have to deal with the public a lot. One of the things I ask them, and it's usually a very, very straightforward question, one of the things about providing a good sales culture, a great sales culture, is differentiating between a transactional relationship with your customers, your potential customers, and a relational relationship with your customers and your even if they're just, what's that?
That's a really great point, but go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, you're fine. And, one of the things that I think it's kind of hard to impress upon usually younger people who, they see it as they have their own separate goals and their own separate dreams. So maybe they're the assistant golf pro, or maybe they're just an hourly employee. And honestly, they probably think, I don't need to do anything in the pro shop. I just need to get my hours and get out and do what I really want to do. But the key in anything is that if you have a relationship with it, it allows you to use that as a springboard. And, I haven't encountered too many people who are successful that have done it all by themselves. So even if it's, folding shirts and making sure that the correct amount of shirts are there, I mean, that's something that can be tedious, but that care and that ability to transfer that knowledge to a customer who wants a different shirt in a different color or pattern, and they don't know when you're getting in next, but you can impress them with your knowledge and just show them other things that could possibly be of interest to them, it helps. But enough of me talking. What do you think about relational versus transactional? How do you teach that if you can?
Well, one of the great things about the golf game is that you have either members who you see often and who you probably are going to get to know. Most high-end clubs have maybe 500 members. That's a pretty finite number. You can get to know 500 people by name real easy, especially if you see them twice a week. But even public golf courses have regular customers who aren't that much different than members in that you see them often, and the two and both you and they, you as the employee and they as the customer, have the same love of a game. So that makes it very easy to create conversation, and conversation leads to relationships. And you're absolutely right in that conversation and those relationships also lead to sales. But you have to have the right people and the right training as to the culture that they're developing here to really have that properly. And you're right. There's an awful lot of people that get into golf just to get a check, just to kill time, and maybe they're really there because they get to play free golf once a week. Who knows? But the fact of the matter is that any job is more fun if you're productive and if you're good at what you do and if you know what you're talking about. And on the sales side of things, people will shy away from talking about things that they don't know about, but they can't wait to tell you all there is to know about the latest hybrid because they just heard the story and they just bought one and they've been down to the range and hit it and they love it. And, so I try to instill and inspire all the people that work for the clubs that I work with to have, that product knowledge, the right attitude to deliver that knowledge. There's nothing hard sell about any of this that I'm talking about.
Awesome. Looking at my notes here, and we just talked about sales culture and relational versus transactional. Now this is going to be somewhat biographical in a sense, but for the guy who's an assistant golf pro, looking back on just some of the, just your side dealing with sales and merchandising, and just how integral the pro shop can be in a golf pro success. How did you get ahead? What are some of the things that you focused on? I'm not saying that we know you didn't necessarily run a shop, but like, how do you get ahead, with turning merchandise? How do you get ahead running a pro shop? Like, how do you make it successful? I mean, we talked about buy plans, obviously, and the sales culture, but what are some other things that, like, you can propel your shop and your career, for that matter, as a golf pro forward?
Well, it's interesting. Before the crash, I was working with almost predominantly high-end clubs. And there were a lot of high-end clubs that frankly didn't care whether they made any money in the shop. To them, the shop was a service for their high-end members. Since the crash of, 2008 or whatever, that has changed dramatically. That almost all pro shops now are expected to be profit centers. And if they're not, the people who run that club or own that facility want to know from the guy that they've hired to run that place why. Why is it not a profit center? Why is it that you're over inventory? Why is it that when we come in here, the staff doesn't know how to talk about the inventory, et cetera, et cetera? So things have changed dramatically, I want to say, in the last 5 years. The assistant pro that you're referring to, and it typically is it is assistant pros that work the floor of any pro shop, are going to be much more likely to become head pros if they work at one of the service culture or one of the clubs that has a reputation of having a service culture like we've been talking about. And obviously, if they work at a well-merchandised shop that has a reputation for being beautiful and making money and keeping the members happy, the guy that has that on his resume and that's part of his reputation has a much better job of getting a head pro job than the assistant that does it. So it's very important, I think, and more important now than it was, say, 5 or 6 years ago, to have all that ammunition when you go to, say, interview for a head pro's position.
Now, I mean, that's for all you assistant golf pros or anybody who's in charge of running a shop. Those are, I mean, a lot of things that we just talked about recently are things that are not, I don't think they're rocket science at all. You just have to commit to doing them, And
none of it's rocket science, that's for sure.
Yeah. I'm looking into what we've talked about, and one of the things that just I keep coming back to is your book and your website. So how have you pivoted in all the knowledge that you have and the expertise that you've been able to share? How now do you position your book and your website? Is it more so just for a resource, or do you want people to go there and to see what your company and what your consulting is about? How have you positioned yourself now?
Well, frankly, David, I mentioned that I was going to write a book, and I created a blog to sell the book. The fact of the matter is that once I got the blog up, and it just took off in terms of readership, I realized that people did not want to buy a $29.95 book called The Successful Pro Shop. What they wanted to do was read often from someone that knew what they were talking about how to help them run that shop. So the blog became as opposed to being a marketing vehicle, it became a way for me to give back to the industry. I mentioned that I love to write, so I'm putting the two things that I love most, golf, retail, and writing, together. And I've created an awful lot of friends because of that blog. Like I said, all over the world, actually. Interesting, too, that in 2010, after the blog had been running for 2 years, a fellow by the name of Rick Summers, who owns PGA Magazine, called me up. And he said, Craig, he said, you don't know me, I don't know you, but we need to meet. I've been following your blog. You create editorial that we don't have but would like to have. And so we met and we struck up a deal where he would create blog space for me at pgamagazine.com. And that's what the Upscale Golf Shop is, the space that he created. But that it would be mine. I could put in there whatever I wanted. And now he and I have become, since 2010, become incredibly good friends. He's a great guy. So all of it is directed at all the things we've just been talking about. It's how do you do this better?
Well, and that's the cool thing, is because you set out by putting up the site as a way to start to write a book, compile information for a book, but you never even got that far.
I realized people really didn't want the book.
Yeah, and I would venture to say that's you saved yourself a lot of time, a lot of effort, and you got an audience. You got the perfect audience, in a sense. A more, not necessarily. All golf audiences are somewhat cultured, but you got yourself an audience that is directly intrigued and interested in your content, and they don't have to, like you said, they don't have to shell out X amount of dollars once. They essentially get a subscription to your content, which was not the plan, but is also a great offshoot of your plan.
Well, the blog doesn't cost anything to visit, and I've had people suggest to me that I should set it up that way, but it's really not about that. It's much more about just wanting to talk to this bevy of friends now that I have across the industry, and give them what I think is the latest cool thing that I've seen and wanted to talk about. So it's much more informal. There really is no money involved, and the same thing I would. My relationship with PGA Magazine. And we work on a lot of different projects now that I've become affiliated with and such good friends with Rick Summers. We do sell-through boot camps where we'll go into an area of the country and invite the top 25 shops in that area to a one-day conference where we just all sit around a conference table and talk about business. And Rick manages to get sponsors for that, and they attend also, and they're part of the conversation, and that pays for the conference. And so a lot of cool things have been happening, and what I end up doing is wearing a lot more hats because of all these things.
Well, let's talk.
I like all the hats I wear.
Yeah, I was going to say. I mean, before we go on to the next part, you have quite a collection of hats that you're collecting right now. So looking back on just, I don't want to say your whole career, but just looking back on some of the concepts that we started off the interview talking about. You weren't this borderline psychotic golf playing freak. I mean, you like golf, but you got a passion, as in sales, to match up with something that you really like to do, golf, and you've created a career for yourself. what are some of the concepts that you've learned along the way? What are some of the principles that you've learned along the way, whether it's just business or, self-esteem? What are some of the things that have carried you to this point?
Well, I started, when I first got out of college, I was working with computers. I was actually working in a computer room that didn't have any windows on the night shift. And
wow.
it didn't, and I went into the fellow I was working for and said, look, I really appreciate the job and all you're trying to do for me and all that, but I can't do this. I have to be around people. And he said, so what are you going to do? I said, well, I think I'm going to go buy a liquor store. So for 5 years, I built up a liquor store. I increased the revenue about 800%, and sold it 5 years later, which was my plan. I had a 5-year plan to get in, get out. And I was going to just then take that money and go buy a bigger liquor store and do it again. But I ended up in the apparel industry. So my love of retail through both the liquor store and the apparel, and I worked for Joe's Bank Clothiers for 10 years. I put together with the fact that I liked golf and got into the golf apparel industry. And then later on, like I said, I put the love I had of the golf retail world together with my love of writing, and I just keep putting things together that seem to work. I don't think that answers your question, though. Why don't you ask it again?
So what are some of the principles that you've learned? I can see just by you retelling your story, and just there's a very calm, assured confidence in just what you do. And I find it fascinating in the sense that it's not bravado, it's not over the top, but it's definitely like you know what you're doing and you love doing it. So what are some of the principles that you've learned along the way?
Well, I think we already talked about a couple of the most important principles, and they all have to do with human nature, because it all really is relationship. I know everybody in the golf industry will tell you that it's relationship selling. If you want to sell something to pro shops, you have to create a relationship with the people running that shop and or the head pro and or the general manager or the facility or whatever. And relationships are created, let's say on the sales end, as an example. Relationships are created by your ability to convey empathy. And how do you convey empathy? You start out by being personable, looking people in the eye, smiling, but then you ask open-ended questions and you become a good listener. And now you have empathy with my business, so I'm interested in doing business with you because you care about me and my business. So that part of human nature is one of the basic principles that, and I never burn any bridges, obviously, with that as a tact. And, any aspect of what we've talked about, you can apply what is the real human nature aspect of this to it and probably come up with a whole lot of answers for other questions. Like I mentioned earlier, people walk into a shop, and if nobody pays any attention to them, doesn't make eye contact, doesn't really seem to care about them, then why would you get excited about buying something there? Mm-hmm. Again, that's just human nature. So I think the whole relationship thing, and that's why I said when you first used that word and brought it up, what a great point, because that's what it's really all about. It's all about the golf retail is all about that, and the love of the game.
Yeah. Well, Craig, this has been a great interview. Where can we find more about you and running a successful pro shop?
Well, the blog, like I said, that's the purpose of the blog that I have, and that's successfulproshop.blogspot.com. You can just Google Successful Pro Shop. That'll be the first thing that should come up in your search. And then the Upscale Golf Shop that I'm writing. Sometimes the content is the same, depending on how busy I am that month, and sometimes I give them different articles or interviews than I put up in my space. But that's probably the best, easiest, fastest, and cheapest way to find out more about me and what I have to say. The Successful Pro Shop has everything that I've written on it since 2008 archived on the site. So if you really wanted to play around a lot and go through that archive, there's about, I think it's 150 articles or interviews in there. And then I sell manuals. I wrote a manual called The Winning Golf Culture, which I think is one of the best things I've written. And I sell that on the blog. And I also wrote a manual called the Merchandise Buy Plan Guide, kind of a how-to bulletproof way of putting together a successful buy plan. And I sell that on the blog also.
Well, Craig, I just want to thank you again for coming on the show. It's funny how, whether we're talking about sports, business, family, food, it doesn't matter. It's always about the relationships, and it's kind of awesome to hear that again, even on something that is so high level and so important, as far as numbers and revenues. It always comes back to relationships. I want to thank you for coming to the show.
Well, it was a pleasure being here. Nice talking with you, David.